When your spring to fall league takes the summer off, it's That's So MLS, a North American soccer podcast with myself, Andrew Bates, and Nick Thornton. Nick's not with us today. He's on international duty, and so are the teams and players of MLS. We've now completed, I guess, the spring part of the schedule in advance of the 2026 Men's World Cup to be held in U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And teams this past weekend got into national team mode with the mood turned to soccer. Lionel Messi in staring at you from chip bags in grocery stores across Canada and I'm sure the United States. We thought it was a good time to chat about the some of the history that soccer has in the United States. This is going to be a big moment for the U.S. and Canada, and in order to get into that fully, we spoke to somebody who specifies in that history exactly. Mark Franek, author of American Soccer Nation, the remarkable 150-year story of Yanks on a roll from mob football to the modern game, spoke with us, and I had an interview with him, and I'm excited to share that with you. And he's got a interesting perspective on the ways in which we can celebrate his aim is to celebrate the game warts and all. And so please, without any further ado, enjoy our interview with Mark Franek. First of all, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on the book American Soccer Nation. I've got a chance to read it. How are things going with the promotion of the book?
Hey, Andrew, thank you. It's good to be here and welcome all the listeners. Yes, this is my first full-length book, so it's my first rodeo. It's going great. The book will be available for purchase on Amazon August 28th, so that's about a week from when you and I are recording here. And yeah, there's so many things going into publishing a book, and now with social media that's demanded of an author, it's been a whirlwind. And of course, I have a full-time job with the kid who is in the union program as well. So I'm juggling things, and everyone is being helpful in the whole soccer universe except my wife.
I'm so glad to get to chat, and I think that when you look at the history of I think when you look at the discourse in terms of what are the great teams in North American soccer, there is more recent teams like Inter Miami. There are teams that are MLS originals like the LA Galaxy. But one of the names that stuck out to me when I was reading your book is Bethlehem Steel. Can you please explain Bethlehem Steel? Who were they, and do they get enough credit?
Yeah, the Bethlehem Steel. So I'm not going to get the names right because we're pulling out a fact from a 300-page book. But let me get some of the facts out there for the listeners. There's this steel company called Bethlehem Steel that's located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's about 20 miles north of Philadelphia. But back in the turn of the last century, in 1908, 1910, 1912, the head of the company and his board, organized and built a field that was specific almost to soccer. And the head of the company wanted to assemble the best soccer players he could. And for the first couple years, Bethlehem Steel, not the company, the team played in the Blue Mountain League, which is a relatively small central Pennsylvania, East Pennsylvania league. And of course, they shellacked everybody because they were being supported by the local steel mill, which within a decade would be one of the top 3 steel making companies in the United States. Several years into their run, they started to expand and started buying players from all over the East Coast of the United States and started to recruit from Europe, namely from Scottish and other countries other teams in England. And they assembled on United States, of all places, a small town, if you will, an hour probably north by horse and buggy, and then by early model car, a wonderful team that entered in 1921, the first fully Professional American Soccer League, ASL. But back to the question, Bethlehem Steel, one of the greatest teams in the first 50 years of organized soccer in the United States, heralds from a tiny little town 50 miles north of Philadelphia, being bankrolled by an owner and his board who just loved American football. And of course, when I say football, I mean soccer.
One of the things that I took away from your book is this desire to sort of establish that soccer has in North America and in the United States has a history that is not too dissimilar and stems from the history that people may be more aware of when it comes to English soccer and soccer in other nations, and sort of to own that, and in some sense to celebrate that. What led you in that direction, and how did that play a role in what you tried to do with this book?
Yeah, so you're talking about the genesis of the idea to tell the book, or are you talking about the idea of how to tell the American story? Is it about the idea to write about this? Or
Yeah, what your idea was for the book, and what are you trying to say, I guess, when it comes to that American history of soccer?
Yeah. So, Andrew, here's the story, and it's a true story, of course, because we're all being honest here. I had no idea to set out to write a version of elite male soccer in the United States, but I am currently employed, and 4 years ago, I got hired to teach English at a school called YSC Academy. Now, that's a fully independent school, could operate on its own in Pennsylvania in the United States, but it was through a gift of the founder embedded completely within the Philadelphia Union franchise. So what that means is today we have about 85 students, 80 of them populate the Philadelphia Union's youth teams from U12 on up through 18. 5 or 6 of them are in independent clubs elsewhere in Philly. But the school has been built and it caters primarily to the athletes that the franchise is churning out, signing, and now stockpiling and selling since the MLS has changed some rules over the last couple of years that made it beneficial for teams like the MLS. They don't have to split the proceeds when they have any sale outside or inside. Getting a little bit off topic, but the school supports the union. So our kids come to the school in the morning, drop off their bags. Most of them, unless they're old, go train for 90 minutes in the morning. They take showers in a $50 million facility. They train, they take showers, they walk over here, they have breakfast, and they have their entire academic day within a couple hundred yards of the stadium. So we have 5 classes. We don't have things like art or music, but you have your standard core classes that all American young men will get at any school, public or private: math, science, English, history, and then Spanish or another class. And they do that for their entire career here, and then they graduate. And maybe 15% or so of every graduate will turn pro by the time they graduate from high school, and the other 85% will go on to college. So that's where I was hired to be. The head of school, speed the story up, said, "Mark, listen, in addition to teaching English, I'd like you to develop a history of U.S. soccer class, because our kids are graduating. Some are getting signed. Many are going on to top Division I schools. But when we ask them questions in the building, they don't know anything about our own history." And I said, "Great. Listen, you're going to pay me to teach English? And then on top of that, you're going to pay me to teach soccer?" Yes. So I started reading a bunch of books on the subject, quickly found that much that had been written about the American story, United States story, was dull or fragmented and just plain boring. And when I tried to slip it into the kids, here's House on Mango Street, okay? Here's Animal Farm, and here's a chapter from this book. They quickly complained because the stuff that I was asking them to read was really dull and boring. At which point I started to write my own chapters and then go 3 years forward. And now we have this book that was born from a classroom environment with an audience of the students themselves, but really a wide audience for anyone into soccer, elite soccer players, to soccer moms, to coaches, to rec people, to someone who gets hired by an MLS team in the front office that doesn't know anything about soccer. It's a wide audience that tries to tell our story, the American story, with its warts, but also its victories in a coherent fashion in one book. So that's the story. It was directed towards students. I wanted to be positive. I wanted it to be foundational. I wanted it to be optimistic without being unrealistic. So, of course, we've done, and the Canadians have done a lot of things to shoot ourselves in our collective feet of this soccer thing, but we also have some wonderful things that we've done, and we're moving in the right direction. And I hope that's what our audience, we can complain about it, but come on. 10 years ago, there was a swamp. 15 years ago, there was a swamp where I'm sitting right now. And now we have a Philadelphia Union and a high school and a wonderful training facility. So come on, even though we're 1-6-1 right now, the Union, we're still moving in a great direction.
I think that one of the things that is interesting is and this is the same for any historical examination, is the way in which the things that people think to be, are truisms about American soccer are things that either developed very recently or, that came out of a very specific set of circumstances. You talked a little bit in the book about the anti-soccer lobby and the way in which, I guess the game has had to sort of get past this narrative, this competing narrative that comes from, other sports and other codes of football, I guess.
Yeah, Andrew, don't we all live with the trolls and the people who just downplay soccer or roll their eyes, and that's fine. That's fine. The way I describe it, my dad, who loves me dearly, wants the best for me, has probably read my book start to finish, still complains incessantly about soccer. I can't believe it. Stop. Like, this book is not dad. You are going, God bless your soul. You're going to take your own version of how the United States works in your own sports of baseball and American gridiron football to the grave with you. And there's nothing wrong with millions of people not paying attention to soccer in Canada and America. But you know what? There are tens of millions strong, getting stronger every year, that do care about soccer, that want to consume good soccer, that go to the local stadium, whether it's USL local team or up to the MLS, and do have kids, men and women, who play soccer, who do consume every weekend European matches. And it's growing, and it's here to stay. And the smart investors that are investing around the countries, there's no doubt that it's growing. We don't need, at least in America, 330 people following soccer. We don't need that many, but we're on a full field press to increase interest. And I think, just like some of the smart investors think, that the next 10 to 20, 30 years, if we live that long, we're going to see incrementally the tides start to materially shift. And if you don't like soccer, I just roll my eyes. Fine. I don't even watch American football anymore, or occasionally watch basketball. I watch soccer all the time, and I know I'm not alone.
What when you look at, I guess, the push towards the 1994 Men's World Cup in the U.S., how does MLS grow out of that, and what parallels or differences do you see in the lead up to that World Cup in terms of the domestic game in the States versus where we're at now heading into the Men's World Cup in 2026?
Yes, that story is interesting. There's been several books and many articles written about it, but just to summarize for the listeners, some may know it very well and others may not. Recall that the United States, at least the United States, qualified that for the 1990 World Cup on merit after Mexico and our region had been knocked out because they played overage players that was out of their own yearbook in a youth FIFA Cup. So they're out. It gives us Canadians and Americans and some others a little bit of breathing room. And we qualify after beating Trinidad and Tobago on merit for the first time in 50 years. So we go to Italy with a team made up of mostly college players and lose all three games. But respectively, our guys are like college guys. We're playing fully professional pros from Czechoslovakia and Italy. It's not even a fair fight, if you will. They had a 50-year head start. So now coming back into the United States, we need to put on a show. We had United States put on the Olympic soccer games in 1984 to great success. FIFA took notice of that. The Yanks can put 100,000 people in the Rose Bowl to watch the final in an Olympic game. That's a lot of money for FIFA and the sponsors. So although United States, of course, didn't have, nor Canada to my knowledge, and maybe you could fill me in, neither of us had a fully functioning, top to bottom professional team in 1990. So in order for FIFA to give us the rights to host it, we had to promise them that we would create a professional league within a certain amount of time. So go into the 1990 World Cup. The United States had already qualified at merit, had one competition under their belt, notwithstanding what happened in 1950 when we went the whole way and we got third place. That's another part of the story that a lot of people don't realize. Yeah, the first World Cup, there's only 13 teams in it. Not that third place is not too shabby for the little old United States. But now we're in 1994, and lo and behold, the Yanks put on a pretty good show for the world footballers and for our own kids. The stadiums were filled to like 70% capacity. It blew away what Italy had done 4 years prior. There's nary a piece of grass out of place. A couple stadiums were a little bit short, too short for FIFA. But when we told FIFA that they had to spend a couple $1 million to change the pitch, they balked. And the games would head in at least two fields that were 10 yards, almost 10 meters shorter than FIFA standards. But the Yanks put on a good show. Now, remember, we still did not have a fully functioning professional team. So our players on the United States team were making their living primarily abroad in Europe, a couple in South America. And man, there's a lot of stories about these guys. It's very similar for the Canadians, I suspect. When you show up on a European club and your nationality is American or Canadian, you better be damn good because you're never getting the benefit of the doubt. And it is about as hard to start and to play regularly on those teams as it is for I use the analogy of a fern to grow in a rock and then crack it. It's just, you have no rope and it's difficult. But our young Yanks did great. And we went, of course, into the final 16. We got out of our group. We beat Colombia. And then we ended up failing to Brazil on a close game. And then, of course, Brazil went on to win. Now, your question is related to the MLS. So the Yanks could put on a show. Yeah, we filled these capacities. Most of these were American fans, statistically speaking. We've always known that Americans appreciate great soccer. But can we support a bi-coastal, fully professional league across 3 time zones? That's a lot of things that people don't give the United States or Canada not credit for, but reality. You can get around to all the teams in England within an hour and a train pass, right? You can't do that in America or Canada. But now we're flash forwarding, and then I'll shut up. You're getting into the MLS. The MLS did not start right away because the investors and the commissioner rightly concluded that they didn't want to go from 80,000 fans in MetLife, it was named another stadium, to 20,000 fans the next year because it wouldn't be good for optics. So they postponed it to 1986. And then that's a whole other story. MLS didn't get off to the greatest of starts, but it is growing growingly, marginally, and now in a much more, much faster pace, particularly the last 10 years.
One of the things that I think is interesting is you talk about that difference between sort of World Cup level stadiums and then the local soccer stadiums is that it feels that MLS is like a winger waiting for the forward pass. They'll say, "Oh, we've got to have soccer specific stadiums. We got to have intimate venues that encourage the atmosphere they want." And then one team shows up, or one or two teams show up that can't fill an NFL stadium, and MLS says, "Okay, we're doing that."
Yeah, I know.
Then we are chasing the football, the American football stadium size capacity.
Yeah, just like Andrew, what do you think about that? I'm all for soccer specific stadiums. Me personally, I think they should be 25 to 35,000. I just think that's a nice little area for us to go in. And you cannot have football being played in cavernous stadiums, these gridiron football stadiums with 70, 80,000 seats. It just does not work. It's not good. It doesn't feel right. It feels icky. But again, unless you're Atlanta United, in some years, go at it if you can support it. But the vast majority of MLS teams, as we know, they cannot support that magnitude on a weekly, monthly basis in season.
I guess one of the things that we come to with this World Cup is the idea of MLS in a time of great change, both in terms of the fast expansion that has taken place, and also the calendar change that's about to happen. And part of the reason for that calendar change is this idea of wanting to be like or wanting to fit into the global the global calendar. From your position as somebody who's written this book and has seen into the history of some of these successes and failures, I really liked the sort of all of the issues around the ASA to start off. What do you think? I guess what lessons does the history of American soccer show to this idea of undertaking big swings to try and get more global relevance?
Right. So listen, there's at least two parts to this story, and they're not the same. And let me try to articulate what I mean. If I hear you correct, you're asking, listen, America and the Canadians, we've experimented with the global sport. We've tried these things to make it more appealable to our audience. Now, why are we doing that? To sell a product to an audience that, at least in the last 50 years, if you go back to the turn of the century, it's really a fascinating story. We're neck and neck. I just want to go on a tangent for a second. In the ASL, the 1921 and 1931, we're neck and neck with baseball. Football, American football did not exist in any real, neither did the NBA or the NHL. And you had some pros in football, soccer, making as much money as most of the top end baseball players. Not the Babe Ruth at the very top of the food chain, but 75% of the baseball players were making about as much as the top players at Bethlehem Steel and Falls River Marksmen. I don't want to get into that. So that's the 1920s. So now
Yes.
we go into this last 50 years here, and we've now had to play catch up. We've had to play catch up. That's a whole other part of the story, why we're playing catch up, at least in America, with eyeballs and dollars and wallets. So we had to make things appealable. And some of them are hokey dokey. Okay, they're laughable. It's like, what's so MLS, right? Why are we gonna have, at the end of the game, we can't tolerate in America a game tying 0-0. You can't have 0-0. So we're gonna make these weird penalty kicks start at the 35-yard line when you have 5 seconds to kick it or the goal to miss it, and then you have to have the stopwatch. Well, who's clicking the stopwatch? And you don't have any bar at the time, so you don't know where he's going over 5 seconds. It's like a nightmare. Some of the players like it. Some of the fans like it, some hate it. FIFA hate it, but that's an Americanism. We also had a bunch of dumb ideas that I don't want to get into, but they're crazy ideas about dividing the pitch up into different quadrants and giving a penny to a guy, only one guy that could swat the ball. He can't carry it. He can't carry it, right? But he can swat it down. Well, that's a dumb idea. So part of it is like, okay, there are some things that Americans and Canadians ought to do that are perhaps different than what the other more traditional footballer countries are doing. But if you had to ask me what my opinion on it, I would just say, but not much. I'm of the opinion that everything gravitating towards how the Europeans are doing it in terms of the amount of minutes that are played, how extra time is done, additional time, penalty kicks, refereeing the calendar. The calendar is going to help American and Canadian kids. It's going to help the pros in terms of their contract negotiations. It's going to help the leagues. It's going to help the media. When we get in line with what the rest of the world is doing, there's probably going to be more benefits, I would argue, than negatives. It's not going to be perfect. I am not an owner. I'm an English teacher writer, but I just think that the gravitation towards the international norm, if you will, with how the soccer is played and done in the rest of the world, notwithstanding promotion relegation, which is another Americanism. But the many of the things that we're doing, we're on the right track, man. Come on. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the game. So copy what's working in other countries, and then maybe have a little tweaks here and there that keep it under the Canadian roof or under the American roof. That's my bit. I'm sure listeners may disagree, and I respect that too. And soccer's not the same thing for everybody in the same town.
So from your perspective, it's not too big of a jump.
No, you're talking about the calendar changes?
That's right.
Right. I don't think the calendar changes. Again, remember, I'm looking at it because I teach kids every day. Some of them are already professionals. They're out there training, their soccer's ramped way up, and then they're in the building here getting their diplomas. And then they may play for the union, they may not, or they may get sold on. So when they're coming into my class complaining about calendars and international windows and missing school and how am I going to do this and that, and our schedule is on the different, like I'm looking at it through their eyes. Professionals who are dealing at the agency level, at the top players, at the top elite. Remember, it's only a small percentage of the kids. It benefits probably the MLS, the owners, the media deals, and the players and their agents to be on the same schedule or similar schedule as the rest of the world. Because when you try to do it on your own, I used to be a former lawyer, that you're only going to cause a commotion. And what's the reason for it? We can play most of our games in fine weather. Come on. It was like 70 degrees here in January. And we don't have the problem anymore. Like sometimes I'm clicking and watching. You got to explain this to me, Andrew. I watch Canadian Premier League every now and this past year. Weren't they playing in snow? I mean,
a lot of it like
you guys
like
can play in
TSC.
snow. We can play in snow.
That's right. I think that's fair. I mean, there's differences to it. My concern is just with the breaking of habits and the forming of habits. I wanted to ask you about the specter. I think that one of the things when you have some challenges, including contraction of clubs or what happened to NASL, that it can sort of form as a specter on that is always sort of chasing you in terms of the concern of, and I think that this was a big factor for women's league's development in the first 5 years of the NWSL, where they were thinking, oh, we want to make sure that we don't, we want to not, we got to, every new year is a bonus, when you think of what has happened previously. So when it comes to this sort of level of do you now see the stability that maybe wasn't there in those NASL years and in the various attempts between that and MLS?
Sure. Let's just get a couple definitions out for people who may not know this. The NASL didn't have a salary caps. I mean, it had teams like, of course, the New York Cosmos that were able to buy Pele for $4.5 million on top of paying off $1 million tax bill in the mid 70s and bring him over and then start surrounding him with other players from Europe and from South America that had big names that were nearing their retirement. And it started an arms and a foot race that eventually bankrupted the league. Now, it wasn't the only reason why the NASL got bankrupt. There were a lot of other problems. There were a lot of other owners that were just one hair shy of being a charlatan. And you also had other owners that had the best interests of soccer in mind, like Hunt and some of the other owners, who Lamar Hunt, who was a wonderful supporter for soccer in North America. But the NASL just didn't have any regulation, and it was making up rules literally as it went. Briefly, and then we'll move on to real quick. The last year that the NASL had their soccer bowl was named after the Super Bowl. It was this game between two teams, and they had to play a home and away match. Well, in the first one, a guy got a red card. Everybody in the world knows if you get a red card, you have to sit out in the next game. Well, you had the commissioner Woosman who came out and said, "Listen, in the interests of the game, Fletcher, can play in the final tomorrow." Like, I mean, that's the championship game of a league that had been operating for 16 years. One guy gets a red card, and yet he can still play. Now, you cannot have a league that does that just makes stuff up as they go along. Now, to your question about MLS, listen, this is debatable. There's some MLS lovers, there's some MLS people that tolerate us, wish we could get better. And then there's a lot of MLS haters that just want to blow it up, can't stand it, think that everything is wrong. I am an MLS liker. I think there's more. There are more things to admire than to despise in the MLS. If I had a choice, sure, I'd rather watch one of the Premier League games or La Liga, wherever my son wants to watch. But I follow a couple MLS teams, and I'm employed in an MLS universe. And here's what I like about it. And now we're going to get into touchy subjects, but briefly, yeah, it's a locked league. The locked league makes perfect sense if you're a league owner. And I understand it would be great. This is a whole other topic. We've been talking about this for decades. Right. But it's not going to change. If you look at this from the San Diego FC ownership group and their lawyers who forked over $500 million, that does just to the other franchisees before a stone is overturned and before one person is hired, $500 million for a franchise fee and you're the lawyer for them, you would never enter a league where you're not playing MLS soccer the next year. Yeah. I'm not saying it's right. I would love to have promotion relegation, but it's not practical in the near future. So why do we argue about it all the time? So now we go back. You have 30 MLS teams. It's a stable economic model. The league is still functions as a quasi single entity. Maybe your viewers know about that. Like they share in revenues. It's complicated. It changes every year. You need a lawyer to figure it out. But everything that's good for Toronto over a certain amount of ticket sales and jersey sales is good for Philly. We're all sharing in some of the same kitty, including what's happening with Messi. It's a very unique model. And boy, I'm telling you, some of the other teams in the other countries that are down a level or two would love to have the MLS model. So we're not going bankrupt anytime soon. Soccer is growing. The ownership group, whether they care about youth development in Canada, in America, that's another story. But the professional league is not going anywhere. It's stable and it's functioning well. And if you're lucky enough to live near a stadium, you can watch some pretty good soccer. It's not great or comparable to the top 8 leagues in Europe, right? But we're getting there. So yeah, I am an MLS liker. I think we have a lot more to do from top to bottom, but I do not like people complaining about stuff because I grew up in the 80s where there's no soccer. You had to sit there with the antenna, on your TV, your dad's TV, to try to get in soccer made in Germany, and you'd luckily get some fuzzy-headed German blonde-haired guys running around like ants on your screen. That's the mid-'80s. Do we want to go back to that?
One of the things that I think of when I consider continental competition, we talked a little bit about how we watch leagues in Europe versus leagues here. I do find a sense of kinship with other leagues in CONCACAF and other clubs in CONCACAF. There's more push towards having more inter-CONCACAF collaboration. And of course, there is the history of Canadian soccer and American soccer has intertwined, both in NASL years, MLS years. From your, I know that your book has a tight focus to make sure that you could get it all in. But where do you think that cross-border collaboration sits in the history of development of the North American game?
Yeah, I'll be brief on that because, to be honest, I haven't read that much about it and I haven't researched it. So I only have an opinion based on very little facts. But to those facts, you can go back into the NASL, which basically gets started in 1968 and collapses in 1984 after a 4-year slide. Well, in that, of course, you had Canadian teams that were willing to enter the league and did very well, mind you, and even won the NASL a couple times, if I'm not mistaken. And if you even go back before that, there were also Canadian leagues and teams crossing the border all the time to play in these showcases, if you will. So we've always shared an interest in the game. It's just, could we find a way for the top leagues to generate and exist and then grow? And I knew, again, I'll have to rely on you to talk to me a bit about your own professional, your Premier League and how that works. But of course, now with the MLS, you got 3 teams that are functioning well. And I think, Toronto killed it. I think it was the first time you guys won the treble. It was the first time in MLS, 2017 maybe. And, there's really good things afloat at Vancouver. I love Montreal too. You have a union, a guy that I taught in my classes here with Andrew Craig and his brother Brandon. Brandon, I think, is a defender up there. And so yeah, there's cross-pollination, and we need to keep helping each other. What's good for American soccer ought to be good for Canadian soccer, and what's good for Canadian soccer ought to be good for American soccer. But
there was
I'm interested in you, Andrew. You know a lot more about it. What do you think about the intertwined leagues and where we are in cross-border travel and promotion?
There was essentially a push to the brief version is that Canadian Premier League formed out of a desire to have more spots for Canadians in the national team because there are 3 Canadian teams in MLS, but I think a continuing discussion is around Canadians counting as domestic players in MLS, which is a door that's opening a little bit all the time. There was an interest in forming a Canadian league. It launched. There was issues involving commercial deals that were set up in order to make that happen, which sort of posited this idea of, I think, steady growth. And then Canada qualified for the 2022 World Men's World Cup on merit, and I think that shifted some things financially, and now the federation has renegotiated a deal. So the current
So
sort of
it's
setup
getting, you're
is
telling me that that qualification didn't help supercharge things? You said it worked in the
it
reverse. Is that what you're saying?
it helped, but in the exact one of the issue is that the this is a very complex thing in a very short amount
Okay,
of time.
okay, I'm sorry.
But to the deal used sponsorship money to reward the owners of the Canadian Premier League who took part in Canada soccer business,
Right.
who were supporting the game in doing so. When Canada's sponsorship revenue went up, its expenses went up, but the deal directed the sponsorship revenue to the commercial body
I gotcha.
in a way that left the federation sort of underfunded.
So there
But
was
I would
pushback and consternation about that.
That's right. And now they've reached a new agreement to try and make that a little bit better. And right now it's in a stable place in terms of the three club in MLS and then the Canadian Premier League continuing. There are always there had been a team that had contracted and there's a new team. Like any new league, it's continuing to have, to seek its footing. But that is the current set of things. I know that in terms of the door is always widening in MLS in terms of increased spots for domestic players and counting certain types of Canadians as domestic players for non-Canadian teams. I think in the last couple of years, Canadians in MLS in key positions in non-Canadian teams has gone up in a good way. But I know
Good.
that this league is also kind of formed for the benefit of the U.S. men's national team and not necessarily for Canadian development. And I'm sure that there's always sort of a tension there in terms of, making sure that it works for everybody and also, the intentionality of that mission.
Andrew, these are all great questions. They're connected, and it's really another book that me and other people will write. And that is, how can we improve youth development in America and Canada, right? Because that's
Right.
really what it's all about. I mean, let's briefly talk about it. If you have 8 teams in the Canadian Premier League and 3 MLS, you have, if I'm right, 11 fully functioning professional teams. But if they don't have a youth development academy undergirding it, going way down into what the United States Soccer Federation calls Zone 1, U6 to U12. It doesn't matter what the teams at the top are doing. This is what we had in the NASL. You had these top teams, right, that were spending millions of dollars a year on international players, and not one of them had a fully functioning youth academy. That's crazy. Now, back to I think the point you just made. It's true. It may be true that statistically 27 teams are in the continental United States, 3 in Canada. And yes, there's more American owners, of course, and more American players, but it doesn't mean that within those 27 MLS teams built on American soil that their respective youth academies are functioning at a high level. Some
Right.
are barely functioning, and I'm not going to name names, but I just think it's important for viewers to think about this because this is something they actually know about because I work within one that has found a way to do it well, and statistics don't lie. Full 7 of our grads have been capped on the full United States national team, and our school's only been around for 13 years. They've earned over 105 caps. This is before this summer. So our little school here in Chester, Pennsylvania, near the Delaware River, has graduates that have earned 105 caps. Well, that just doesn't happen without a lot of money being put into youth development. And that's the
Right.
question. What are the clubs doing in Canada, in the United States, that are putting money and resources in terms of teaching and the total environment for the kids, coaching? There's so many things to talk about, and there isn't one right way to do it because it's suffused with a host of local issues. And whether your ownership is on board, whether your sporting director is on board, and money, and everybody knows whether you win or lose. Like there's so many factors. And in order to get it right, You have to have a lot of stars aligned. You have to have local support on up to the ownership group, and you have to have money, and it is not cheap. The union has found a way to be relatively successful, but even we are concerned on our return on investment. But briefly, what I hear, and I just can't stand this, is when you hear MLS ownership groups complaining league wide about return on investment for their academies, it's not fair because they're talking about all 30. When you take the top four, right? And you identify the data, who's spending money on youth academies, who has good coaches, what's their average salary, how many support staff, do they have a high school? This is the biggest thing that my book gets at and plays with at the end of the chapter. Do you have an embedded high school where the kids are living the dream? They're totally immersed in soccer culture and then you don't go turn pro? Congratulations, you're going to college. It's in America. Just some of the best schools. It's the stuff that a Croatian kid or a Brazilian kid, his dreams are made of. What? I can't get signed by Union One. My life is over. Oh, but you're going to Rutgers next year or Penn State or Princeton. Come on, let's stop complaining about it. So back to the MLS. There's certainly a lot of MLS owners that don't care. They don't care about youth. They would rather buy a $4 million player from Europe or Latin America than pour any money into their youth academy to do the hard work. Now, not all of them are doing that. Why can't somebody find the top 5 of the 30 MLS clubs and the Canadian Premier League clubs that probably have academies beneath them, if I'm not mistaken, and figure out what's working and what's not, and trying to get a best practices involved because the future is youth development. We
Right.
churn out a couple kids here or there, Alfonso Davies, Christian Pulisic's, they're sort of being, but we need 20 Alfonso Davies. We need 20 Christian Pulisics. And it's not going to happen the way we're currently doing it. We need to get better. And that's something I invite people to figure out. Listen, don't look at every MLS club. Do the research. Find out who in Canada and America is doing it well. Copy it. Make it work for your club.
One of the things I think that is like the defining issue that North American soccer faces. I have a little bit of different perspective because we are a league focused podcast. I try to focus a little bit on the idea of games being played, people going to the games here. The national team discourse I leave to people who will in some senses will stew in it on their own time. But there he is, and people do tend to have their moods rise and die by the national team a little bit. But I think that one of the things that any club team focus, the challenge is the gulf between participation and engagement in the football culture at a playing and a watching level, and trying to make that translate beyond the 20,000 seat stadium that has great atmosphere and everybody loves going to Wanderer Grounds in Halifax. Everybody loves it. The great images and photos, and trying to transmit that at a broader scale so that there is more interest and more dollars that allow to fund more production in a sense. Trying to connect those, I think, is the big challenge. And I guess that in terms of how will be an increased youth development enable clubs to I guess attract more attention and to become a bigger part of the culture in their home area.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one right way to do it because if we knew how to do it, we would have done it already. Okay. I mean, there's been a lot of people plugging away at this issue for a long time about youth development. And to be honest, it's getting better. But back to your point, I'm a big proponent of trying to get the people with power within the organizations, including the national team, your federation, the Canadian Federation, and the USSF, and all the top pro teams to realize that we're all really playing on the same team. And that to realize that in order to be successful at the very top end, the top athletes, this is my opinion, people can complain about this, but I believe that it's true in my heart and in my research and in my daily work with elite athletes. The top pros playing in Europe and even in the United States, from Canada and they're going to populate obviously the top, obviously they're the top players. They're going to the men's national team. But where did they come from? They came primarily from the pro clubs. That doesn't lie. You can take the stats out the last 10 years. Where are the kids coming from? They're coming 90% of the time from an MLS club or probably from, if you're in a Canadian, I bet they're coming from one of the 10 Premier League, right? Statistically, right? So what are we doing together to realize that we shouldn't be fighting against each other? USSF needs to realize that they need to pay attention. They shut down their DA Academy and just threw in their hands and didn't do anything. And the MLS teams had to come in and pick up the slack. Why couldn't the brain people at the USSS says it's time to turn it over to the MLS. It's where it's going anywhere. They already have pipelines to the pro team. This is a no-brainer, right? And we're going to sanctify them, and we're going to put checks and balances in there. We're going to put and review who's doing well, and we're going to publish it every year so that if you do less well than your local independent club, that's bad for you. But we're connected. We are connected, and that is not easy, but we ought to be able to figure out how to do this better on our 3 time zones. We have enough money in the system. We have beautiful facilities that rival some of the best facilities in Europe. We have athletes. We have enough athletes, at least in the single digits, but we don't have enough development that carries through on up to the pro team and people working together to push these kids up. And we don't care if they play for the Philadelphia Union. I don't care where they play. Go to college and then sign a pro contract or never play pro. You're still going to consume college, but we're consume soccer. We are all connected to this sport that we love. And instead of complaining about it all the time, celebrate the show. Celebrate the show and celebrate your peers when they make it. Celebrate the teams when they do great. Stop complaining about American and Canadian soccer incessantly. Let's get some solutions and start moving in the right direction.
Two closing questions. So in your book, you talk a little bit about in your work with young players, suggesting the hero's journey to them.
I'm glad you read that footnote. I'm glad. Bonus points for you.
What other narrative structures or narrative templates do you think apply to North American soccer?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one, right? Well, I'm just going to answer it with the obvious answer. And the hero's journey applies to any journey, whether it's one person or a group of people. And that just goes back to what I said. This whole idea that you're on a journey, and you're on a journey, what? In this case, I would say to develop not just a respectable native pro league. And again, it's more complicated in Canada, I understand, because you got 3 and you got the U.S. driving the sleigh, so to speak, and you got these other 10 teams functioning on their own league. But if we are to say the journey is to create a more than respectable pro league on our own soil, and then esteem, not just good on the international level, esteem. That should be the goal, right? Canadians and Americans, we just don't want to be pretty good. We want esteem on the international level, and we want to look at our own pro league and say, listen, it may not ever be, probably won't ever be better than the top 3 teams when you're looking at it, whether it's England and La Liga and Germany right now and a couple of the others. But we can be a top 5, top 8 league in the country, perhaps. That is a goal, perhaps. And when people laugh at me when I say that, no. What is wrong with aspiring to be esteemed on the international level, top 10 in the world fairly consistently? I mean, Italy can't do it. They're in and out, right? But that ought to be the goal. And a respectable home league. And how are we going to get there? Little old me, I do not have the answers. I just have energy, and I see kids every day that are living the dream, and some of them are coming out of here and they're doing great things, man. And why can't we be that? Why can't we aspire to be that and understand that the hero's journey, there's going to be a lot of tests, a lot of obstacles, a lot of failures. Let's see what happens this summer. And the world might end if you guys and us don't get out of the group. Or is that going to end soccer in Canada or America? No, it's not. It's time to reset again. So it's a long journey. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a whole lot of work from a lot of people that are brighter than me and are more wealthy than me. And it's going to be groups of people realizing that we're all in this together, and winning matters. And so does youth development. But if you only care about the pro teams or some of the pro teams, or if the owners only care about making money, it's not going to help youth development, and you will never be able to compete against a Latin American team or a European American team. They're pushing thousands and thousands of kids out, every year that they're playing. We cannot do it that way. We have to do it the American and Canadian way. And it's going to be similar to what's going on and yet different. We're going to have to utilize our own resources to do it. And what's it? We're all connected. Youth development matters and the pro matters. Support your local pro team, support your youth, figure out a way to push them up, and then celebrate their victories wherever they end up.
Back to Bethlehem Steel at the beginning of the discussion. One of the things that I found really moving in your book is where you talked about sort of the big names of the past and who doesn't have a plaque, and what meeting rooms do and don't have some sort of memorial for the important role that they served. From your perspective, for our listeners, what's one name in North American soccer what's a name that you could pick out that listeners should know that probably doesn't get talked about enough?
Yeah, sure. Great question on a way to end this soon. One name, and it's not going to be a surprise for historians, would be Archie Stark. His brief story was that he was born in Scotland and emigrated to the United States in New Jersey when he was 13. And within 16 or 17, he was leading some New Jersey teams the whole way to the AFA final and the other rival league final on a national level. And yeah, he was an American and he stuck around. And here again, we're going to get into just a little bit of statistics. He got signed and kicked around. He got kicked around for a couple of teams that interrupted by World War I, of course, which was harrowing. And he served and came back. And then he started playing professionally in a New York team in the ASL, of which was the 8 teams in 1921. First fully professional team, mostly on the 4 quarters of the United States, but they were fully professional or mostly fully professional. Historians are arguing, well, not everybody was getting paid. Now, I don't want to get into the minutiae of that, but it was a fully functioning league that teams got fined if they didn't show up and people were getting paid to play and they were paying fans. Sometimes 10, 15, 18,000 people were coming to some of these venues, which was bigger than 75% of the Major League Baseball teams at the time. Only the New York teams and the Boston team was drawing more. So you have Archie Stark in 1923. I may have the years wrong. 1923-24, who scored 67 goals in that league. And a couple of those goals were in the Cup at the time, what now we call the Lamar Open Cup. But anybody who scores that amount of goals in one season, and I think he had 6 hat tricks during the year. And he also, by the way, when we were playing Canada, he put 5 in against the Canadian national team, I think in 1924 or 25. He is, without a doubt, the leading goal scorer and one of the best forwards as an American in the 1900s. Of course, I don't include the modern era, which subjectively can be defined a bunch of different ways. But Archie Stark, this little guy who, grew up in Scotland, but plied his trade when his DNA was forming in his early teens in America, played for 10 years and was the leading goal scorer in the ASL 1921 to 1931, who played for the American national team several times. It was without a doubt that is probably the name that nobody really knows about and is one of the great American players of all time, at least from an historical perspective, the 100-year history from 1900 to the turn of the 2000.
Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. American Soccer Nation comes out April 28th. Go check it out. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Good luck tonight, Toronto, over the Union. We're going to be nipping at your heels when this gets published. Hopefully the Union might get a point, but I think we're in big trouble to Toronto tonight.
And that was our interview with Mark Franek, author of American Soccer Nation, the remarkable 150-year history of Yanks on a Roll, from mob football to the modern game. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope if you get a chance to read the book if you can. I found it to be really interesting and found the history of that the game has is not too different from it's of a piece with how the game evolved elsewhere in the world. This is a part of the evolving story of soccer and football as it spread. And I was really interested to learn about some of the the names from the past, like Bethlehem Steel and like Archie Stark, that I might not have known. So again, we very much thank Mark for his time, and until the World Cup comes around, and until we get to speak with you next, you can find us online. You can find Nick at That's So MLS on Instagram. You'll find us at that'somls.com. Please rate, review, and subscribe. We're very thankful for your support. You can find me on Blue Sky at teambates.bsky.social, Team Batesy on Instagram, www.team-bates.com. And until we get to speak to you next, don't get sent off. And if you get sent off, don't get the commissioner to bring you back for the final.